All right, firemen, settle down, firemen. Good evening. A warm welcome to our museum members and to viewers tuning to our live broadcast. I'm Tim Brown. I'm a retired FDNY firefighter and a survivor of 9/11 here in New York. This evening's program is presented as a complement to the exhibition Faces of Ground Zero, which is now on view downstairs in the museum. The exhibition features 18 photographs, life-size Polaroids taken by tonight's guest, Joe McNally. The photos are a part of McNally's large exhibition of 246 Polaroids, which were first exhibited in 2002. Each offers a humanizing portrait of those who responded to 9/11 and worked in the rescue and recovery operations here at Ground Zero. Shortly after 9/11, and in the midst of my deep grief over losing so many of my close friends, I was voluntold to go get my photo taken by a guy named Joe, who I didn't know. Luckily, I had my brother Chris with me by my side to help me through my anger. Chris still stands by me today. We are lucky to have him here in the audience with us tonight. You can see the image Joe took of me, the hollowness I felt inside. It hangs downstairs in the museum and helps the museum visitors see what was happening to us in that moment in time. As you can see now, with the help of God and my family and friends, I was able to get through it and find new happiness in my life. With that, we now turn to tonight's program, which will reflect on the undertaking of this project in the emotional weeks following the attacks and how this medium served to uniquely capture our community. Joe McNally is an internationally acclaimed, award-winning photographer whose career has spanned 40 plus years and included assignments in over 70 countries. He's been at various times in his career a contract photographer for Sports Illustrated, a staff photographer at Life, and currently an ongoing 35-year contributor to the National Geographic, shooting numerous cover stories for those publications. We are incredibly fortunate to have Joe McNally with us here this evening. I'd like to thank him personally for being so generous with his time and his insights. Please join me in welcoming Joe McNally in conversation with Executive Vice President of Collections, Chief Curator, and my good friend, Dr. Jen Ramirez.
This is a total treat. We've been waiting a long time to do this, Joe. I'll open by saying I think I first met you in person in 2003. Mm-hmm. But as a longtime commuter through Grand Central Station, I had actually met some of the faces here tonight a year earlier, or in 2002. Those remarkable faces because of the exhibition that you had managed to somehow miraculously mobilize in 4 months and a day after the 9/11 attacks. So I will also say that Joe probably doesn't remember this, nor do I, but our tricycles might have passed each other because we actually grew up, our formative toddlerhood was spent in the same New Jersey town. I'm kind of remembering, maybe. Anyway, I wanted to first say that Joe's project is both time-stamped to 2001 and it's timeless. It's very rare that a photographer can get both right. And I think it's the time and humanity you brought to the project and people gave back to you. There are 246 portraits that make up the faces of the heroes of September 11th, and I wish tonight we could talk about each and every one, but we'd be here for camped out for many a moon, so we'll unfortunately have to curb our enthusiasm and bring it tighter, which is really hard for a curator, let me assure you. So Tim did a great job of, going through your creds with all of your fancy schmancy awards. I was going to say that if you've read Joe's blog or gone onto his Instagram or Facebook or Twitter sites, which several hundred thousands do, his loyal social media followers, you'll notice that he always uses this hat rack of self-identifiers. And the first is photographer, director, author, storyteller. And then as to the 70 countries, I found out in chatting with you the other day, that is an odometer that actually equates with about 3.5 million miles of air travel that you've logged on assignments and teaching workshops all over the world. So I'm not going to go over the thicket of your career awards, of which there are many. So I'm just going to start with the obvious and just say, what drew you to the practice of photography? Because you do everything so well.
Well, I would question that last sentence. But no, thank you for that introduction. It's marvelous and all of that, to be sure. I mean, the person I really have to thank, in addition to the staff here at the museum who have worked so hard, is Jan. Jan has been a champion of these photographs since she saw them. And her persistent efforts to sort of keep it alive and keep it visible and keep the museum's interest in it alive have been phenomenal. And she's really the reason those pictures are downstairs. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, too, the pictures are as you say, the timestamp. But really for me as a photographer, I grew up in an era where you strove to be anonymous behind the camera. Now we live in a day and age where the BTS and how you did the picture is so much of the story. But for me, a camera like this, especially this kind of, that has its own kind of rigor and stature, really stands in service to the people who came in front of it. I felt there was an incredible nobility to the people who came and stood in front of that lens. And I thought the camera was an appropriate instrument to try to recognize that, honor it, and hopefully preserve it. So yes, to all those things. I did become a photographer a long time ago. I allowed myself the title of professional photographer in 1978. And I don't want to see anybody here trying to do the math on that, okay? All right, let's just get past it. I started as a copy boy at the New York Daily News. I used to run Jimmy Breslin's copy when he was writing letters to the son of Sam. And his secretary, Marie, was terrified that Sam was going to come up and blow her away to get to Breslin. It was that kind of raucous time that I came to New York City. The city was kind of a mess in the 70s. But I have to admit, I loved it. I would have slept on the sidewalk for a chance to be a New York photographer.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it started.
Right. So, sort of like a secular book of Genesis, I know there are just a lot of origin stories with you. And I thought maybe we'd go to the origin story of your relationship with the World Trade Center as a photographic subject. In their prime, you described them, and I love this, as the twin exclamation points at the southern tip of the magnificent mess that is New York. And, obviously they loomed large both as foreground and background in your cityscapes. But since you started it, let's try time travel back here to two of your sort of very memorable early encounters with the towers, and just talk a little bit more about this.
Very minor role in this. Mike Lipak shot the picture. And he went on to become the boss of photography at the New York Daily News, and he was a very dear friend. And we had this odd sort of juxtaposition because it was a union shop. And I was a studio apprentice. It meant I was a boy. I wasn't a man. You were only a man when you went on the street. And then Mike went on the street out of the studio, which meant I was kind of next, And so I didn't wish him ill or anything, but I was desperate to get out there with a camera. But prior to that, we had become very good friends. But prior to that, as a copy boy, I was sent downtown. This is Mike's picture, and I was sent down. This is in the day where no digital transmission was available. You'd have to go get a film bag, So I raced down on the subway. It was all jammed up because this George Willock had caused a sensation. And I grabbed his film bag and I ran it back and it became page 1. And that was one of the first kind of touchstones I had with these amazing buildings.
So I think we've progressed a year and quite a way in your career in certain ways. So talk a little bit about this one. This is of course, the North Tower antenna that has just barely gone up, and we're seeing the technicians climbing up the ladder, but somehow you're higher, and that meant you're really at the top. So maybe tell me about this.
Well, there was a photographer back then who was quite enamored of himself, and he felt that he owned the sky. He did a lot of high wire work. And I'm a competitive son of a bitch, to be honest, just be straight up about it. And I was determined to not let that happen. And so by odd chance, I got a staff photography job at ABC Television, which was really weird for a still photographer. But they needed tons of stills because, the programs, I can't tell you how many times I photographed Susan Lucci at all my children and all of that, But because they broadcast out of that tower, I had a little bit of an edge, and I used that edge so I could climb the tower.
So sure-footedness is also part of your resume. I mean,
you don't want to make a misstep up there, But I'm very comfortable doing that kind of thing, and these guys were great. One of them, his nickname was Spider-Man. So.
Yeah. In the Faces of Ground Zero collection, I stumbled. There was one picture that I kept going back, like, why is this here? But now I understand. And it's of Alex Smirnoff, was that his name?
Alex Smirnoff.
Explain that one.
Alex Smirnoff was the chief or director of what they called the mast operations at the Empire State Building. And I've climbed that tower 4 times. And Alex was just a New York gentleman. He's gone now, but he had a sensibility that sadly has been lost. Administratively, at the Empire State Building, everybody kind of went by the book. But Alex knew that the Empire State Building was built to be photographed. Mm-hmm. And I worked with him. I asked him to climb. And my first experience was very disappointing because they gave priority to Ripley's Believe It or Not. And so
Believe it or not.
I was the still photographer, so I was below on the tower, on the mast, maybe 20 feet from the red light, the warning light, and the daylight had come up and they shut the light off. So that was my first adventure. And then the next 2 were weathered out. And then I finally got a picture for the National Geographic. I was doing a story called The Power of Light. And as a photographer, as a photojournalist, what you strive to do is make pictures relatable to people who are going to pick up the magazine. And so I thought to myself, like, everybody in their lifetime has changed a light bulb. What's the most unusual light bulb I could get to? Empire State Building. So I did climb it any number of times. By the end of it, Alex, I've been up for other things as well. Alex just gave me a facsimile of a Union card. So I could basically climb anytime I wanted, because they were always doing work up there.
Also, it's poignant to think that for a brief period of time, the Empire State once again became the tallest building in New York after 9/11.
Exactly.
And its antennas became important again.
Very important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to just, move on now and talking about something different, but actually it's the origin story of you with this unique Mobi-C camera, the piece of equipment that you have compared to a bulky beast on its best day. So, first tell us where was the studio and how did you come to meet the bulky beast and tame it?
Yeah. It was over on the east side, off the Bowery on 2nd Street, and I was sent there by a magazine because it was such an unusual photographic instrument. The interior of the camera is the size of a 1-car garage. The lens is about 70 pounds of glass. You can't focus the lens, it has no shutter, it's just stuck in the wall. Legend had it that Dr. Land of the Polaroid Corporation actually cadged it out of a U-2 spy plane. I cannot vouch for the veracity of that, okay? But that is a legend associated with the camera. So the magazine sent me down, and I just photographed the camera because it was this unusual camera. But I got intrigued by it. So I called the magazine back and I said, really, the way to do this story is to give me funding so I can go back and use it. And the magazine said, no way, because the rental of the studio was $2,000 a day, and every Polaroid you pulled from that machine was $300. So in the infinitely wise manner of Joe McNally photography, I said, well, screw you. I'm going to go and I'll fund it myself, and I'll use the camera myself, and I'll show you that you're wrong to not do this. Again, stubbornness. And so I went back in, and beautifully, wonderfully, Jenny Ringer was a principal at the New York City Ballet. And I knew her a little bit from photographing at the ballet. I called her up and I said, would you pose for me? And she was all in. She even came with one of her dressers and costumes from the ballet company. And she posed beautifully. Amazing. Because just the mechanics of the camera, there's no shutter, as I said, so you have to wear camera obscura, which means you pull a cap off the lens of the camera in a dark room. So you have to go black in the studio while two technicians spool the camera up inside. It takes about 30 seconds. And she would go on point, and she would hold. I would say, okay, that's exactly where you need to be. She would relax, and then we'd go dark for 30 seconds. I'd give her a warning, and she'd go on point again. Because in photographic parlance, depth of field is very important. In other words, what's sharp in the photograph. And at f/45, which is a massive f-stop for a lens, I had about this much depth of field. And she hit her mark every single time. And I made 7 Polaroids of her that day.
Wow.
And I gave her one, and I looked at her and I said, I hope your parents have a really big house. Because, and it proved to me anyway something that I was curious about the camera, but I also knew at that point I could work it.
Right. So I'm just going to try to get us a little further on. And first, were you at this studio on September 11th? I believe you were in New York.
Yes.
So just talk a little bit about your day, that day.
That day was obviously an incredibly horrendous day. We had the news. I lived up in Westchester at that time, went to get the kids home from school, and then I went to the studio. Lynn Del Mastro has been my studio manager for a long time, and we were together on that day, and we went to the roof of our studio, which was right on the Hudson River in Dobbs Ferry, New York. This old beat-up warehouse building, and we went to and we could see the plume. And it just, the news of it, the crumbling towers just brought you to your knees.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had any thought that day, really, other than numbness and wondering how my kids would grapple with this, et cetera. But I was frustrated afterwards because I'm a photographer and I'm supposed to go make photographs of things that are happening, and I couldn't do that. Sports Illustrated assigned me, the only assignment I got that week was Sports Illustrated assigned me to photograph Mike Piazza, because he was being inspirational. He was a New York ball player, and I photographed him on the top of a roof in Manhattan. Now try to get to a rooftop in Manhattan on 9/11 week. That was rough. But I made that picture, and Sports Illustrated was fine about it, and I thought to myself, this cannot be the only touch I have with this. This is the most important thing I will ever witness in my life. And I'm not a police officer, I'm not a firefighter, I'm not a paramedic or anything like that. Photography, other than the documentation, which was going on magnificently at the pit, photographers there, I don't do that. That's not my bailiwick necessarily. I thought, how can I contribute? That's something, anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're sounding a theme that we hear so often here, which is, especially if you were in New York, that call to service and this profound desire to help. But as you say, very few of us had the skills to actually, convert that into consequential action. But you had a tool, which was the camera, which I don't think maybe people would have thought as, automatically at the front of the arsenal to go after this beast, as you say. But, and of course, photographers were downtown, witnessing and chronicling the extent of the devastation. But you had a very different idea, which was the human face of the first wave of help. And that seems to have been what New Yorkers needed so much in that time. So I think that was kind of brilliant. But take us then to how this project actually was announced as being born, and the number of weeks maybe that you worked on it. I think it was late September, but take it from there.
Yeah, I knew I bypassed all the picture editors at Time Warner. I mean, it was an idea that needed money, right? So I went to the top of Time Warner. John Huey was an old Southern newspaper man who was smart as a whip, and he'd kind of look at you sideways and let you babble, and then he'd give you an answer right there. It was a bit cheeky on my part. I went up to his office and I asked him for $100,000. And he said yes, right on the spot. But then as I was walking out of the office, he looked at me in his, about to do a very bad Southern accent here. He looked at me and goes, "Now, Joe, you spend $25,000 and get me no pictures. That's okay. You spend $100,000 and get me no pictures. We got a problem." Just walking into the camera, you spend 20 grand, just about, with your crew and the lights. And then I started calling. I called Pro Photo. I said, "You're going to give me a whole bunch of flash units. You're going to give them to me for free." I called my lab and I said, "You're going to process all the film I'm sending in and you're going to do it for free." I called up Kodak and I said, "I need several hundred rolls of 2 1/4. You're going to give them to me for free." And everybody said yes. And we started. We were in the camera maybe 10 days after, and we knew we had to work fast. And we stayed there for 3 weeks. I slept at the studio. I didn't venture really further than about 3 blocks from the studio. There was a loft bed over the camera, so I just slept there. And we promised everybody who came in, no matter what time you come in, we'll make your photograph. So we had, people, crews coming in 6 a.m., lunchtime, dinner time, 2 a.m., so. Yeah.
So, so it was around the clock.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. And then I also think, how did the word circulate to participants? Was it all word of mouth, or was it?
At first, it was word of mouth.
Yeah.
The first firehouse I went to, and all I had were the pictures of Jenny, and you're approaching firehouses, like Engine 33 on Great Jones Street, who lost nine men. So you walk in very tentatively to ask a question, and I rolled out the picture of Jenny on the floor of the firehouse. You can imagine the commentary at that point, and but about 2 hours later after I did that, we had a wrap of a Halligan on the steel door of the studio, and they had rolled the truck around.
Yeah.
And John Baldessari, who's retired now, he was a firefighter who later became a lieutenant. He was the first one to step in front of the camera.
And my understanding, too, is that you, not only did they step in front of the camera, but you gave people an opportunity to come behind and watch the magic happen with the Polaroid as it was being developed. Was that a long process, or?
No, about 90 seconds. The paper that we used in the camera is the same thing you get in your little Polaroids back in the day, So, except it was a massive sheet. It was oftentimes called the 40 by 80, the camera, because Polaroid paper comes off at the factory in 40-inch rolls. And they would segue some of those off to the camera to keep it supplied. So it'd be an image 40 inches by 80 inches, roughly. And the distinctive part of the Polaroid, of course, is the chemical tail that frames the border of the photograph. And we started there and we just kept going. I didn't even know we had enough film, paper, to get through the project.
Yeah. So you said Halligan tool. So
Yes.
I'm going to just, the other thing that I think is so intriguing about this project is the fact that you encourage people to bring their tools and sort of pertinent equipment, if they could, to the studio. And so that got me thinking, back in the days when I might have said I was an art historian, of some of the, the great artistic precedents for this kind of work, whether it's Walker Evans in the 1930s and the Great Depression with farmers and their tools, but I was particularly thinking of Irving Penn and the series he did in the early 1950s called The Small Trades, where he sort of humanizes the working backbone of New York City and Paris and London and these beautiful kind of black and white life-size studio photographs.
That was an amazing effort by Penn. He was an astonishing photographer. And you acquire lessons along the way and trying to tell stories about people. What do people do for most of their lives? They work. And oftentimes that work is written on their body. And the tools that they use become part of their personality and who they are. And so every phone call we made, we said, please bring the tools of your trade.
Right. By the way, I think I told you the other day on the phone that I had the great fun of speaking to a New York City police detective who's one of the portrait subjects downstairs who had been assigned to work at the Fresh Kills landfill. And he told me that he got cold feet a little bit about bringing tools from the landfill. They were city property. They might have been contaminated. So actually, what he brought to your studio, he had found in his garage in Tarrytown. He swore me to secret, but he said it'd be okay to tell you.
Well, I'm not giving you any secrets, Jan.
All right. Anyway, so if the 246 epic-sized portraits weren't enough, you decided to mount an exhibition in an incredibly short time. So I just wonder whose idea was that, and how did that come together at this venue of all places?
I cannot take any credit for the speed of the exhibit. I mean, the photographs were designed to be seen, to be displayed as an exhibit. And we fended off some nutty stuff. Oh my God. In the days after 9/11, word got around about the project. We got a call from someone affiliated with Saks Fifth Avenue. They wanted to put the giant Polaroids in their windows on Fifth Avenue, which was initially intriguing, like, okay, well, a lot of people would see them.
Yeah.
And then I learned they wanted to use them as backdrops for sportswear.
Right. Wow.
So that was a hard no.
Yeah.
But I have to credit the staff of Time Warner. I mean, one thing they did back in the day is they knew how to publish, and they knew how to publish quickly. They had to move. And they put together a program after the project was shot and starting to become the formation of an idea of a show. Morgan Stanley came on to provide funding. Uh-huh. And so the initial showing of the photographs was at Vanderbilt Hall and Grand Central Station, and then it toured 6 other stops and became a book. And I was very happy for that because it fulfilled the promise I made to everyone who came that, yes, this is for charity. This will generate funding for 9/11 related causes. And all of what happened was the show, everything contributed to the raising of nearly $2 million, which was then donated for the rehabilitation of downtown public education.
Fantastic. So I'm curious. So we have New York, which obviously at the epicenter of this, but my understanding is the show went to Chicago, it went to San Francisco, it went to Paris.
No, it went
London.
to London, went to Los
Tokyo.
Angeles, and let's see, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and then came back to New York and is staged at Rockefeller Center, where they usually put the tree on the anniversary of 9/11.
Did you find audiences universally quiet, or did people act differently in different spots?
I think universally the reaction was quietude, because the giant Polaroid or Polaroid imagery is almost grainless, and it has a certain kind of pigmentation, a certain color that identifies it. So being of the grainless structure it was, you could see people's skin and pores. And so I think actually what might have happened, and I may be allowing too much here, but I think when people read the story that people had given us, you know, and was attached to their photograph, they almost were able to have a conversation with that person.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like meeting them.
Yeah. Well, I was also going to say, you know, if an exhibition in 4 months wasn't enough, you had a book within, did the book come out within the first year or even sooner?
I think the book was available by the exhibit.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you had 246 images to select, but you happened to select this one. And I believe your model is here in the audience, but you know, talk about this, your choice.
Louis is an astonishing human being. He saved many lives on that day. And one of the beautiful things about being a photographer is that you oftentimes get sent to photograph people who are truly extraordinary. And such is the case with Louis. And we've been friends all these years. You see, when people walked into that studio, I had no idea whether I would ever see them again.
Yeah.
You know, one and done, thank you, photograph, okay.
Yeah.
You know, but then somebody like Louis walks in and he becomes an essential part of the fabric of your life.
Yeah, yeah.
He also he's pretty good looking, right? let's just get it out on the table. At the studio, we kept referring to Louis as a firefighting Robert De Niro.
Okay, the truth is out.
Yeah, the truth is out.
Okay, that's great. So just going forward a little bit, before we get here, I just want to, I think I've read that or heard that by around 2006, so the 5th anniversary after the attacks, your friend, the Moby-C camera, was ailing and had been put in storage and the paper wasn't available any longer. But one of your colleagues told me that yours was the longest running project with that equipment, and the beast, as you called it, never once broke down.
It never broke down. It had a tolerance, I think, of just like 1/45th of an inch or even smaller than that. I can't remember, between the rollers, because the rollers have to squeeze the chemistry across the paper in an even way. Mm-hmm. We ran out of chemistry. So Polaroid sent us 20 by 24 chemical pods. So what we were doing by the end of the project, and you can tell these pictures by looking at the Polaroids, because there's the usual Polaroid squiggle at the end of it, and in these there's a squiggle in the middle, because what we did with the 20 by 24 pods is we taped them together. So when the roller went over them, it squeezed 2 of them simultaneously and covered the whole Polaroid, which was 40 inches, right? But it also produced a distinctive little squiggle at the bottom. So, you know, it's all about the squiggle, right? You know?
All right. So I hope my conservation colleagues here tonight are taking note of that.
I think that's that middle chemical stain, if you will, is on one of my favorite pictures, which is Billy Ryan and Mike Morrissey. Mm. So,
which is one that's up downstairs.
Yeah.
So anyway, at the time, the camera was going into its long rest. 5th anniversary, I know the New York City Fire Museum did a roundup of the New York City firefighter portraits. Yeah. And on the 10th anniversary, and I saw this one, there was sort of a reunion installation up at the Time Warner Center, which is now the Deutsche Bank Center at Columbus Circle. And for it, I think you rephotographed or updated portraits of 24 of the original people that sent, and we have an example here. Yeah,
Larry. Larry is one of those very tough individuals. You know, he's seen a lot in his life, but he emotionally came to the studio and he was angry and upset, mm-hmm. and we stayed in touch over the years. And I made this picture, and the picture I like, 10 years later, has a mood of reflectance.
Yeah.
And he's retired now, but he's just, again, honored to be in his presence, mm-hmm. Especially with a camera in my hands.
Yeah.
But, at 10th anniversary show, if I can make a mild shout out here. And my wife Annie is an amazing human being, and she's very not only patient and kind and all those things I could go on about, but she accepts risk. And we went after the Time Warner Center, which is owned by a shark of a real estate company called Related. And I signed a contract as a lone individual that put me on the hook. And I had to dig deep. And we almost got there. And Annie was, I talked to Annie about it. I said, this is what we have to do, so we'll do it. But then they threw a whammy at me. And they said, all of the Polaroids have to come into the Time Warner Center handled by bonded, licensed art handlers. And it's good to know a couple of people in the FDNY. Because I called Louis, and he said, on it, pal. And the night we put in the show, Mike Wernick was there as well. I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80 firefighters showed up. And they put it in for nothing. And we put snacks out for them. That was all we could do. And I went back to Related and I said, we're not having art handlers, we're having firefighters. You got a problem with that? And they were like, no, that'll be fine. That'll be fine.
That's fantastic. Just another wonderful pairing that you told me about. Father Jordan, who is here
Father
tonight.
Jordan is here as well.
And the encounter in the subway, as I recall, was a...
Yes. We were going on the subway, and I didn't live in New York anymore, and I didn't have a subway card. So Father Jordan owns one of the honors of my life as being the only priest who's just completely cussed me out. Because I didn't have a subway card. And he was like, you son of a bitch, you don't have a subway card? And he's, I got to use my card to get you on the subway? And I'm like, yeah, Father, take it easy, And we ended up with the picture of Father Jordan in his trademark sneakers on the New York City subway, which is what he's been doing for many, many years.
That's fantastic.
What can I say, Father? I asked your forgiveness.
So I thought it would be interesting for some of our group here to know, picking up from what you had earlier sort of teasingly put out, the relationship between the 9/11 Memorial Museum and Joe McNally's collection, because it really began almost seconds or minutes after the announcement was made that there would actually be a complimentary museum for the memorial, which was in early 2006. And I recall that we actually reached out to you, and you were our first podcast guest. We recorded in a Midtown studio where we were chatting about the kinds of resources that might someday grace and augment this collection, and the importance of your work. And I will tell everybody that interview is now lost to humanity somewhere in the depths of cyberspace. We can't find it, but we are working on a DAMS project where maybe we'll find it. But it still holds front runner status. So you were the first in the podcast series. And also as a show of tremendous faith to what we were doing in 2006. We don't have there. You see the accession number. Joe actually donated one of the portraits from this coveted series to us, and it's the striking image you see of Adrian Walsh, from firefighter with ladder 20. A portrait that's also on view now downstairs. And in 2023, Lieutenant Walsh, who was then working at Rescue Company 1, retired after 26 years of active duty service. And she is the voice that will be heard on the audio stop that we just recorded yesterday for this tour. So
Fantastic.
It's really, really, really nice.
She's an amazing person.
I also wanted to mention that in 2008, that's well before the museum opened, we selected some of the portraits from Faces of Ground Zero to be guests at first of all, our first ever gala, which was held at Cipriani Wall Street. Again, we look for a photograph. They're somewhere, which will turn up eventually, but they were there to set the tone. And then in 2011, we arranged for a delegation of the portraits to serve as greeters at our brand new visitor welcome screening center, which you see. It was at 90 West Street. And as you can see, they were a big, big presence in a small, small space. Then, we'll fast forward to the museum's opening in May of 2014. And within our big, big historical survey exhibition, we used a selection of Faces of Ground Zero portraits at small, small scale, but it was to animate a section of the exhibition we call the demographics at Ground Zero. So you see them there, and you'll see them if you go downstairs to have a look. And then in 2016, the museum and Joe brokered a 10-year loan of the full collection of Faces of Ground Zero, predicated on an annual purchase, an annual donation to the museum of one of the portraits. And I'm really thrilled to say that in 2026, this will convert to a donation outright. And so the balance of the collection will forever be with us, coinciding with the 25th anniversary of 9/11. So it's really, really wonderful. And then just in case people haven't been downstairs, speaking to scale, I think we finally got it right. We have them at full scale, only 18, unfortunately, but hopefully there'll be more as we move on. I also wanted to mention something, and that is about this book, The Faces of Ground Zero, which, as you can see, has been well loved. I think everybody in the collections department, exhibitions department has a copy. And that is to say how heavily we relied on it as sort of a combination Facebook equipment guide, if you will, when we were plotting our collection moves. It was sort of, maybe a fusion between Acme Tools and LL Bean for, with a 9/11 focus. And the raggedness of this book is really a testament to how invaluable it was for us to consult. And just, curators get excited about this. I'm not sure if photography connoisseurs might, but I thought I would show you some of the resulting goods that came in. And first with Tim, I would say with his jacket and his clothing, his walkie-talkie, we all but stripped you down to your unmentionables. So we had OEM, FDNY represented in this way. David, I know you're here tonight. Photographer, Daily News photographer, David Hanshu, who was badly injured on 9/11. We have David's also his dusty clothing and his leather shoes, which are on view to this day down in the historical exhibition, part 1. We worked with firefighter Kevin Shea, who Joe photographed. He, ladder 35, he was blown off his feet and blown unconscious when the South Tower collapsed. And you can see here his turnout gear. Paramedic Juana Lomi from what was then called NYU, Downtown Hospital, Beekman Hospital, helped us find a medical supplies bag, which we have on view. It's one I love. NYPD, K9 team Bob Schnell, a cap he wore, and he also donated the collar and badge worn by his K9 partner Atlas, which you see here. And then finally, although I could go on all night, NYPD aviation pilots, Donald Gromling and Timothy Hayes, they piloted the first NYPD helicopter that was on the scene that morning reporting on the situation in deteriorating conditions at the North Tower. And you see here the special aviation unit headset that they wore. So we were extremely thankful for your guidance over those as we were building the collection. And finally, I thought, we could speak a little bit about the rapport you developed with a number of the people you photographed. Whether in front of the camera or behind it, you were all navigating this torrent of aftermath emotions, hour by hour, sort of day by day, week by week. So this process was far from aloof. It was not an impersonal transaction, and we only have time to look at a few of these, but I thought these might be interesting for you to speak to. And the first, I will say, and I'll let you tell the story, this is a pair that you told us if we had them in our collection, we could never separate them.
True, as brother and sister, Danny and Joanne. Tragically, Danny is also gone now. And the Foley family, firefighting in New York City is oftentimes a family business, if you will. Father to son happens a lot. And so Danny and his brother Tommy were FDNY. And Tommy was on, I believe it was Rescue 3, went down as one of the first responding trucks, and he perished on that day. And Danny found his body. And Danny came and posed for this picture the day after he found his brother's body. So one of the important things about being a photographer, in the rush and tumble of making pictures, sometimes it gets a little lost, but it can't be lost in a situation like this, is that in the flash of those lights, you're making an agreement. You're partnering that person who's in front of that lens, who's in a very vulnerable position, and you are making a promise to them that you will do your best at the camera to render them truthfully, and in the aftermath, you will be the good shepherd of their photograph. And I've been in touch with the Foley family now for over 20 years, off and on, not frequently, because you just can't let go of people like this. Joanne showed up with Tommy's ceremonial helmet and his cowboy hat. He was a rodeo rider. And that was it. When you go dark with the camera, I knew Joanne was weeping. I was weeping at the camera. And I simply asked forgiveness for doing my job at that point. I stepped forward and made a picture, and everything inside of me, everything human inside of me was screaming, just let her go, don't do this. And we talked afterwards, and she's glad I did it, because the grief on her face is something that was very, very real, and will always be there. She lost 2 brothers. So the Foley family is just an extraordinary family, and I'm blessed to know them.
Yeah. And this next is sort of a very different move, very lucky move. Maybe, do you remember Josephine coming to your studio?
I do, because Josephine was the linchpin for what was the story called the Miracle of Ladder 6. 6 firefighters stayed with Josephine, even though she was moving slowly down the stairs. And they wouldn't let her go. And the building collapsed. And her pace of descent put them in a stairwell that stayed intact and just rotated, but stayed intact. And all 6 of them survived, pretty much because they stayed with Josephine. So when I wanted to photograph them, I knew I needed Josephine's picture. And we had a date, and she canceled. She called me up. She said, I just can't come. I'm sorry. And I'll use my best persuasion to try to get somebody to step in front of the camera. But at a certain point, you have to say, okay. And then we had a young intern, Alicia, come in the door. She came in the door right after, and I must have had like a wild look on my face, because we had some rolled up Polaroids. And I said, you take a radio car and you take this Polaroid and you go to Josephine's address and you pretend that you don't know that she's canceled. And I swear to God, if you don't come back with Josephine, don't come back. And so Alicia was terrific. She talked to Josephine. She helped her with her makeup, because she She was reluctant to be photographed, and they kind of bonded a little bit, and she came back with Josephine. And Ladder 6 didn't stop there. Sadly, Josephine died alone, indigent. Her body, I don't think, was discovered for maybe 2 or 3 days. And Chief Jonas stepped forward and started calling funeral homes. And he got a funeral home to donate her services, and Ladder 6 carried her to the grave.
Yeah. What's so extraordinary is it was almost 10 years after they'd helped carry her down the stairs.
Yep.
And they were then carrying her coffin into the church, and it's really quite extraordinary. And then finally, as a couple, and I don't mean to put them on the spot here, but I know what a great friend Mike has been, and what a difference 10 years makes. And I think when you went back to photograph them this time, with his wife, Nuri, you see a very different Mike, a very different mood. But, I don't want to embarrass them, but maybe you could say a little something.
Mike and Nuri, to me, are two people who are just a testament to the enduring power of love.
Yeah.
And Mike had a horrific day, but their relationship was so strong, and Nuri kept calling us and just saying that, please, talk to Mike. Yeah. And eventually Mike talked with our reporter. His caption is the longest in the book. Mm-hmm. And they're the kind of people that it's one of those mysteries, really, that, they rise up in such amazing fashion, and you meet people like that during the course of your life. Yeah. And we're still in touch, and 10 years later, I made this very loving picture of the two of them. And I've made a couple of pictures. They're big motorcycle folks, and we've met a couple of times. I've photographed them on motorcycles, and Mike very amazingly and honorably spearheaded the effort to get the FDNY Dream Bike and those other motorcycles here on exhibit, which is, again, just an amazing step in terms of helping people heal and recover. Yeah,
and I want to give a shout out to Mike and Rising Wolf Garage, because we couldn't have done it without them. They were here to help us install the motorcycles, the 4 motorcycles that you see down in Foundation Hall. So that's wonderful. And I added this portrait because it's the portrait that introduces Joe's book. It's of the late firefighter Harry Davis, and it's a reminder that 9/11 was not only, a savage terror attack on this country, it was also an unprecedented environmental catastrophe, as you've alluded to earlier. Just one too many rescue recovery workers like firefighter Davis have now succumbed to 9/11 related illnesses linked to their efforts at Ground Zero. It's a tragic price for the service they gave. And here at the museum, we are now chronicling that fallout story in a new installation down in Foundation Hall, which you'll encounter before you turn to the east and see the portraits of the faces of Ground Zero. That show is actually called Dust, Illness, and Advocacy After 9/11. So I encourage you, when you're in the mood, to come back and have a look. And I wanted to conclude with this image that takes us full circle.
Yeah, Jenny is standing on just about the exact place I rolled out the Polaroid. It's the Great Jones Street house. And John Baldessari is right to her right, camera left, of her. And, several other firefighters gathered around her, and she was willing to come down and go on point in the exact same place that her Polaroid was resting on that floor all those years ago.
That's fantastic. And I was just to end this evening, I know you've referenced this incredible project and archive as a source of light in a dark time. And you've spoken about how the project conveys the quiet capacity for courage, selflessness, ingenuity, and cooperation that resides within the human spirit. And I think that's just a beautiful, perfect thought for this Thanksgiving season. So thank you. And I know we'll have time for maybe a few questions, but Joe has a 3 a.m. call for the airport because he's going off on another trip, so we can't keep him too much. So thank you, everybody. And if you have questions. And maybe, Geraldine, you can see if there are any questions for Joe.
I got you. Thank you. Yep.
Is the Polaroid camera still in existence? And do you have any plans to revisit the beast and do more work on it? Or what is your interest in that area? Thank you.
I could have been interested perhaps if it still existed, but I don't believe it does. I think it's been dismantled, and I actually don't even know of its whereabouts right now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Oh, that's Father Jordan. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
No, I got a Metro card for I apologize.
You're the best. I oftentimes thought after Father Jordan cussed me out, I oftentimes thought, I thought, well, geez, if I ever go to confession, that's the priest I want to see, because somehow he'll understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Joe. That was really great. At any point, did you second guess the choice of that camera because of how difficult it was, or did it come to you right away? Did you know that that was the camera for the job?
Yeah, it came to me. There's no genius or anything about this. I think as a photographer, I think quite logically, and some of the things that entered my head is, if this project is going to be noticed, it has to be different. I'm not going to the pit on a day-to-day basis and documenting the news. It has to transcend that somehow. If it's going to stand the test of time, there has to be uniqueness to it. And the folks who came to the camera proved me right, because again, their nobility and their grace. When you go black in the studio, there's about 30 seconds before I would hit the lights. And I like to think, or have thought, that in that 30 seconds of quietude and darkness, the person in front of the lens became who they really were. It allowed them to just absorb that moment and project it back to the lens, which was fortunate, because for most folks, I only shot one frame, because at $300 a pop, the only firefighter I went beyond one frame with was Jason Cascone, who I think became the youngest battalion chief in FDNY history. Yeah. But he was a probie. His first day of work was 9/11. He was given last rites and put on a bus. So this kid was pretty freaked out. I shot 4 Polaroids of him. And he took such grief from his fellow firefighters. They were like, you just cost this guy more money than you make in a week. But I'm glad I stuck with Jason, and we finally got a photograph where he became part of the show. Yeah. His story was very significant and indicative of everyone who went there, who charged at that site and tried to help.
Yeah. Perfect way to end. Thank you all so much for coming.